that kids have even before they go to school. I wondered if we could go back to your second slide, your first table. Just go back where you had elementary school, middle school. Oh, next one. This is what I found kind of interesting. If you look at this table, you'll see, for example, that the relationship between how well blacks are doing as they go from elementary school reading, 34.8, to middle, 36.4, to high school, 36.8. Slight improvement, right? And you see a slight decline from 59.4 to 59.2. Now you could imagine, and check me if I'm wrong, Professor, that when kids are in elementary school, much of their life until the time they're in elementary school is before they go to school. So the kinds of influences that would make a big difference have a lot more to do with their family, their friends, their community, their neighborhood. But as they proceed through school, more of their time is spent in school. And you would think if the school is really making a huge impact on changing their life opportunities, by the time you got out to middle school and then high school, the relationship between whites and blacks should be changing, improving, maybe dramatically, if I understand this correctly, because these are test scores, right? But in fact, we do not see much improvement as these kids go from elementary school to middle school to high school, which says even if there was a lot that had to do with early childhood, the schools are not able to, in a sense, compensate for it. Am I got that right, or I've got that wrong?
Certainly it shows that the pattern is consistent across all levels of schooling. Now, the figures here are not how are these kids doing themselves. It's what is the level of success of the school that they're attending. And so what it's showing is that blacks continue to attend schools that their fellow students are doing poorly over time. There's not much change. And it might have been different in the sense that high schools draw from larger catchment areas, and it might have been the case that at the high school level that they end up going to better schools than their elementary schools were. But, and some people have talked about at the middle school level that that's an important consideration, that suddenly there's a new mix of kids. But this doesn't show that kind of a pattern at all.
Oh, the differences are pretty.
And my wife was an elementary school counselor for a number of years. And I became convinced talking to her about her experiences that the kids were pretty locked in by the time they got to her. Mm-hmm. And it didn't necessarily show up in kindergarten or first grade, but by second grade, the trajectories of children were already pretty apparent. And if she looked back, maybe she could have seen the signs. They just weren't so clear when the kids were younger. But second grade. So anyway, if I were going to do anything about this system, I would do it at the preschool, first grade level, for sure.
Questions? Chase?
Professor,
and could you identify yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name is Chase Billingham. I'm a graduate student from the sociology department. I'd like to ask you about constraints and choices. And you mentioned that the school district boundaries are one of the main causes of segregation between school districts, and that segregation between districts exceeds that within the districts. And a lot of that has to do with court decisions that in the 1970s that made it against the rules to institute desegregation orders that crossed school boundaries, school district boundaries. But these days, more and more, the ideology that's prevailing in education is choice, providing parents more and more choice, more and more options, both within public school districts themselves, but also giving them new choices like charter schools and magnet schools and school vouchers. And in research that I've done with Professor Kimmelberg in our sociology department, we've been demonstrating increasing racial segregation within the Boston public school system itself. And as you said, that's still minor compared to the segregation between the city and the suburbs, but it has been growing over the past decade or so. So I'm wondering if you could talk about kind of the policy implications in terms of choice and constraint about what might be the best solutions for minimizing racial segregation both within school districts and between school districts. Is it permitting cross-district desegregation orders, or is it does it have something to do with new choice options or constraining choice options?
Yeah, well, I think we're very locked in terms of policies. There will not be desegregation across school districts, and it's very unlikely that school district lines are ever going to be substantially changed in this country. I think that's might as well be off the table, even if it could do a lot of good. So what does that leave as alternatives? I see two alternatives, both of which are also extremely difficult, but have greater legitimacy in the public policy arena, if not greater support. And one is to create greater equality of opportunity about where to live. And I've emphasized that it's a very significant factor within the Boston region is that African Americans and Hispanics are very constrained to neighborhoods in the cities and in the old industrial satellite towns, and for some reason are not finding homes outside of those very restricted areas. Now, it's not because there's a law that says they can't move out, so that's not the problem. And it's not because they can't afford homes in other areas, because in fact, when we get data on people's incomes and whether they're homeowners or not, and their education and control for all these things, the racial disparities in where people live remain at about the same level. I mean, it just doesn't explain very much of the situation. So what is it about? Informal social pressure, informal rules, informal reputations. When African Americans and Hispanics seek to move into the wrong community, they are not accepted. Now, there's also racial steering that still happens. We don't want to believe that it happens, but it happened to me. I moved to Providence 7 years ago, and my real estate lady, who's the wife of a chemistry professor, and she knew I was a sociologist, and she says, we're driving through this one neighborhood not far from the university, and she says, there's some nice houses here, but I know you wouldn't want to live here. What was she saying? Well, I didn't really know, but I soon discovered that it was a black neighborhood. Not a big black neighborhood, it was perceived to be a black neighborhood, and that's what she was telling me. She knew I wouldn't want to live there. So there are, there's a lot of social networking, informal assumptions, norms that are very powerful in either opening up communities or keeping them closed. And I think we need to find ways to open them up. I think that a single step that would make a difference is if district attorneys decided to take on housing discrimination cases and investigate and prosecute violators of the law, because there is a law. However, the law on discrimination in housing is currently enforced only in the following way. People who think that they are a victim, you don't know, like they didn't show me an apartment, but was there one? Hard to know. People who think they might be victims have to collect the evidence that they were discriminated against and bring a private lawsuit with their own lawyer in a civil case. And judges tend not to believe that there's discrimination. It's a very hard sell, because Americans don't want to believe it, and judges are Americans. So anyway, a self-enforcing law. It's like if the law against going through stop signs was self-enforcing, more people would probably go through stop signs. In Rhode Island, everybody does. But in Boston, maybe not so much. Anyway, so that would at least be a symbolic gesture that says public officials take violation of this law seriously. I think that at least would make some difference. The other route is, if you can't move people, is you have to invest in their schools. How much would you have to invest? I think we really don't know. My personal view is that it would be like the effort to put a man on the moon. You have to be willing to spend $1 trillion over 10 years, and I think it could make a difference. Some people say that resources is not the problem. I personally do not believe that. I believe you can get resources and waste them, that's for sure. But I also believe that schools that have more resources can create more opportunities for learning. One of my daughters is learning disabled, and I sent her on my own. Well, you sent your kid to Northwestern. I sent my kid to an expensive private high school that could deal with learning disabilities, and it worked. I mean, the level of attention, the level of qualifications, the focus on her problems is what was required, and she is today a learning disabilities teacher, special ed teacher. So it worked. It was a great investment. I believe that the investment is worth it, but the magnitude, if you think what we would have to do is to deal with half of the schools in America, like it's not on the public agenda today. What we're talking about today is you close a handful of schools and reopen another school like it in a similar place, and maybe that would make a difference. Or we raise the standards. You don't get a degree unless you meet this standard. Well, I guess these are inexpensive approaches, and I just don't think inexpensive approaches meet the magnitude of the disparities that we see. So either you move the people or you invest in the schools. I don't see any other alternative. So where does that leave us in terms of constraints? Oh, there's some big constraints there, aren't there? It's legitimate to enforce laws against discrimination in housing, but we don't do it. It's legitimate to invest in failing schools, but it's not worth the cost. If it were our kids, it would be worth the cost, but it's their kids, and it's not anywhere near a priority in the public agenda.
Question up here.
Hi, my name is Ron Peterson. I'm the author of the book titled Bluestone, State of America. I'm someone who's been to urban schools and progressed urban communities, and also elite private schools in rural America. And I've been around long enough to see these studies being done for at least more than a generation. And I'm a little bit frustrated and have to take exception to it because it seems as though there's a whole academic community and social industry really that's rooted in doing studies like these, and studying kids from preschool to through high school, and studying schools themselves. And what's frustrating is that the whole foundation of your work is rooted in race and poverty. But when you get to the end and you talk about, well, what's the solution? What conclusions can you draw? What's the remedy? You seem to want to shy away from the whole foundation of the problem, which is race and poverty. And I don't understand it, because it seems to me that even if you study, if you study let's just take black community, for example. If you study the groups of blacks who, are educated, who have been, educated well and have gone on and been successful academically, you look at their careers after, they've gotten their education. Compare those to the groups of whites and Asians who you are also studying, and you'll see the same disparity in their career outcomes in terms of their employment success, accumulation of wealth, etc. And so to me, it just seems like all of this, the energy is misplaced, because the bottom line is academic success is nothing more than energy and effort. If you put the effort in school, you're going to get the grade. That's the bottom line. Okay, you tell me, what incentive do these black kids have to put in extra time, extra energy into their academic performance when they know they're not going to get the outcome? They know, they see it every day in their homes, in their communities, their parents, their grandparents, extended family, who they know have worked hard and have not gotten the job, have not gotten the same level of success. They watch TV, they know popular culture, they know money's everywhere. America's awash in money. Okay, you hear about these, what's happened in the financial industry over the last couple of years with, billions of dollars in bonuses and all of this stuff going on. I can almost guarantee you that.
I think we got it. Why don't we let the professor give a response?
The point is, why are you looking at the schools and looking at the kids? Look outside of the schools, looking at discrimination in the community and the workforce, and then you're going to find the answer to this problem. Because until kids believe that it's going to pay off, that the extra effort is going to, if they get the grade, they're going to get the job, you're going to have this. And so you can study it for generation to generation. We'll be here for another generation, another 40 years, looking at the same problem. As long as there's the same disparity in employment and wealth in the country, you're going to have this.
Thank you very much. John, you want to take a crack at that?
Well, I agree. Absolutely. The foundation of this is that blacks and Hispanics in this country are in a very different position. They have very little political power. They have very little wealth, and the same issues that I could talk about in terms of the housing market or in terms of the schools that are available, the same kinds of issues could be raised with respect to labor markets. No doubt about it. However, it does leave me with the question of, and so what? So what? So what can you do about it? I've pushed forward a career as an academic, and what I am really good at doing is identifying the character of the patterns, the scale of the problems, looking for, to some extent, looking for root causes, and making the information public. And the more that in the public eye people are reading that we haven't gotten past the problems that we thought were the problems of the 60s, the more often that's reinforced, I think it makes a difference. I don't think it makes a huge difference. I certainly don't feel like the research that I'm doing has any immediate impacts. So it's very frustrating, absolutely very frustrating. And I sense your frustration, very frustrating. But I don't know what is something else that I should be doing instead.
Next question, over here.
Hello, I'm Judy Potts, and I agree with what he said, and I'm agreeing with what you said. But I puzzle over this because little children are little sponges, and they want to learn and they want to take things in, and we improve schools, but we're missing what comes before the schools. I do some volunteer work at a homeless shelter for mothers and children. And there are two things that happen to these kids. And they're adorable. And they're just wonderful. But they come home to noise. The noise level in places where poorer people live because there's a heavier concentration. So people are up at night, they don't get their sleep. There's a totally different atmosphere than our friend Josh had when he came home with his two quiet parents and maybe the TV set on. It's also hunger. And I don't know that kids can succeed in school if they're hungry and if they're tired. And those two things go along with the poverty cycle. And I think we have to look at those things, getting them properly fed and properly rested before we worry about the schools. maybe the schools are really good, but they can't absorb what happens because they're hungry and they're tired.
Thank you. Professor?
I mentioned that my wife was for many years an elementary school counselor, and her view was that the biggest problem was the parents. For her dealing with her kids, the biggest problem was the parents. They would not reinforce messages that she tried to teach. And the second problem was the teachers. And what there wasn't a problem with was the kids. Well, but of course there are parents and there are teachers, and you can't isolate them from both. And so, yeah, but is there a nice solution here? Is there a way that somehow kids who do come from poor families can be sheltered from the effects of that? I don't think so. And I think there's actually very little that can be done in terms of intervention with families. Another member of my family, my daughter, is a social worker. Her first job was to try to be helpful to mothers who were at risk of having their children taken away by a court because they were perceived to be not fit mothers. And her job was to try to intervene in some way in family patterns, in the mother's behavior, and so on, to make a difference, to make a positive difference. And she did it for 2 years, and in the end she said, I don't think I made any difference. No. I was able to report back what I saw, but the difference I made in the family, you know, and my daughter was a very skillful person, a very good professional, and she was spending time. So I don't think we're going to make much difference there. I do think we can make a difference in the schools. That's where I think we could make a difference. We could make a difference in terms of the training that we give to teachers, in the supervision that is in the management of schools. I think we can make a difference. I think we can get better teachers. But it's not free. And what I doubt is our willingness to make that investment.
Question over here.
Yeah, hello, my name is Jordan Frazic, and I'm a senior undergrad at Salem State University. And I had the pleasure of growing up in Salem, and we're one of those other communities that used to be a factory town, and now is a service-based town mostly. But we have a school demographic that is very few African Americans, probably in the lower than 5% African American, but we have 35 to 40% Hispanic. And I grew up in the town, or the city, as you call it, town, because I feel like we have a really close-knit community. We really know, everybody that lives there knows what's going on in the town mostly. And I was raised with a very large portion of Hispanic people. Of those Hispanic people, I feel like the Spanish people whose mothers spoke English, or who themselves spoke good English at the time, are doing tremendously better than the Hispanics who are either coming here directly from Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico. And I'm speaking outside of Boston and Brockton because I feel like those are where most of the black people are. But going back to how do we fix Massachusetts schools, or how do we make Massachusetts schools better, I really think a lot of the percentage of people that are failing are coming from these Hispanic families who just don't have the means to bring about, like, I'm sorry, I'm starting a little bit, but these Hispanic people who do not have the English background are doing terrible. And the ones that do have the English background, I've noticed, are doing fantastic. Are you aware of the difference between the Hispanic populations? It seems like it's split almost down the middle. It seems like you're either doing really great or you're doing really terribly. And the ones that are doing really terribly, I notice their families don't have this sort of English background. Are you aware of this? And
Got it.
how
Thank you.
Everybody who's working on issues of schools takes very seriously the problem of English as a second language and how it's dealt with in the school. And it is a very tough one. Language facility is a very, very strong predictor among Hispanics of success in school and ultimately success in the labor force. And so it's a big divide, a very big divide. And as Latino communities grow and become increasingly ethnically clustered, so that in fact you don't need to be good English speaking in order to survive perfectly well within the community, then people are going to naturally lose the motivation of learning the language and making that their route to success. So it's a very big issue. Again, I'm not so sure that we are familiar with what the solution is. A lot of experiments with different ways of introducing the use of Spanish language into the curriculum. I'm aware that in Pennsylvania, many public schools were taught in German until close to World War I, and they were teaching very effectively. Those people did move up quickly. I think that's a real option to have Spanish language schools, but I'm not sure that, I have no confidence in my ability to give you an answer to your question. But you're absolutely right, language is a big predictor. On the other hand, as I pointed out, immigrants have something else going for them. There is, all sociological researchers on immigration point out that there is a certain degree of ambition, drive, willingness to work hard, and some values from back home that come with the first generation of immigrants. And it's a resource. It's a resource that I don't think is fully tapped.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Amy Lantinga. I'm a professor at Northeastern, and I have 3 wonderful students with me who are products of Boston Public Schools, graduates. During the break, we were discussing your data and how that, how Metco, are you familiar with Metco? Taking students from low-income, minority students from low-income neighborhoods and busing them to suburban schools. I'm sure they have that around the country, but it's a big deal here in Boston. And what does your data say to support success in Metco programs, things like Metco programs, and does it always work?
Well, it's an alternative to redrawing the school boundaries to make those boundaries more flexible, more permeable. And I think it's really worth a try. But have there been studies of the impact on the kids? That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, I can tell you that
Marcy, could you wait for the mic? Please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Marcy Gafter. I'm a friend. My kids went to the Western Public Schools, a very good suburban school system. There was a Metco program in the Western schools. Metco students are randomly selected. Their parents have to sign them up, but there's no sort of criteria for admission other than parental interest, which I understand is a big factor. The kids who go through the Western schools do absolutely as well as the kids who live in Weston, grew up in Weston. So there's been no difference. They go on to Ivy League and other really good colleges and are just terrific kids. So I think it's the kids, even though they come out of the districts where you show the poverty, you show the, so on. The kids themselves are terrific, just as good as the other residents.
Well, that's very encouraging. And unfortunately, what it means is that to the extent that we have very strong boundaries, impermeable boundaries across district lines, and as long as the minority and black kids are on the one side, that is going to, that opportunity is not there. I wish it were there.
Over here.
I don't have an answer.
Could you identify yourself first?
I'm Barbara Wooden. I work for the state. I've been there a couple of years. My career's been in private companies on the commercial side. And as a management training person, one of the things we focus on in training managers is to pull out expectations, the ones that are never spoken but are behavioral delivered. And I have an experience with my children being in private school and my brother's children. And the expectations that I found in teachers, regardless of their quality, is distinctly different for black people versus white. And it's even more different for young black men. So all these other ideas I think are definitely problems, but I actually think that the biggest problem is the expectations that people have about people of color. And I think as America, we reinforce the negatives. So the people who are Hispanic are not immigrants when they come into the United States. Immigrants is a title for other people. Afro-Americans technically are immigrants just as the Hispanics are, but we put these names out in the categories of behavior we deliver are negative or positive based on that. But I do think expectations is so important for us to understand and to start working more on.
Thank you. Any comments?
It must be important. I'll have to say that when my daughter was in the 9th grade, her counselor told her she'd never go to college. And so I'm very aware of how expectations are voiced, communicated to students, and how strong an effect they can have. And so that's yet another dimension of the problem that I'm not looking into at all.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Let's start right here.
Hi, I'm Ashley Zepcliff. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some positive solutions that we found, not just in busing people to higher income schools, but maybe within lower income schools. Because I know one example is maybe they can't concentrate when they go home and all this stuff, so maybe they're not going to succeed in an environment where you're just sitting there lecturing them math. There was one example, but I don't know where it was, where they took them outside, they had them interact with math equations so that they could still learn. And I feel like that doesn't necessarily have to do with if you're a poor school, or like, can we talk about some positive examples that have been happening too?
I'll tell you what I think is if their schools had the best teachers and the best administrators, that schools would be better run and there would be more learning in them. But I think we've organized our bureaucracy in such a way as to assign, well, it's a privilege to be assigned to the better schools as a principal or as a teacher, or to get a job in a better district. And so there's a natural mobility process here that, on average, the best administrators and the best teachers get siphoned off away from the schools that could need them the most. And so if you were serious about implementing new programming in failing schools, I think you'd have to think very seriously about who are we recruiting to organize those activities.
My name is Maxwell Power. I'm a student at Roxbury Community College. And the question I have is, does this data translate to the university level, especially for private institutions that you find in low-income areas?
To the university level. I'm not very familiar with that. There was a very interesting study that the former presidents of Harvard and Yale, is that Harvard and Yale, the name of guys?
I think so.
Done by a colleague of mine at Princeton, and he followed college freshmen at the elite, not just the average, at the elite private universities to look into what was the experience of minority undergraduates who made it there. And what they described in a series of books, what they described is that making it into Princeton, making it into Brown, was only one step along the way. There were many, many other hurdles, mostly associated with their family backgrounds, that made it difficult for them to be as successful as they could. For example, that in the middle of their first semester, there's a crisis at home because somebody lost their job, somebody got divorced, somebody was put in jail, somebody, like routine problems in their families back home, but kinds of problems that most of their classmates didn't have to deal with. And so my take from that set of studies is that at every level, even among the most advantaged, there continue to be differences in the kinds of issues that have to be dealt with. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank my friend Professor John Logan of Brown University for joining us. I think we're going to be looking at an incredible array of issues this semester, domestic and international. But I don't think there's an issue that I know of all those that I've studied, that is more complex, more difficult, or more important to solve than what we talked about today. And so I'm thrilled that you were able to enlighten us on at least some of these very important questions, and we'll continue to do that in the weeks to come. See you next Wednesday night. Hope you will be back with us as we continue our conversation of Demography is Destiny.